So I used to work on the north slope of Alaska in the oil industry, but the work that we were doing required us to travel far out into the Alaskan Petroleum Reserve, which is basically just untamed tundra wilderness for hundreds of miles. The oil companies, they would build these long ice roads in the winter that would lead to exploration drill pads. Our job was to go out after they finished the initial drilling and test the rock formations for their oil-producing qualities. It was mid-January, the sun hadn't quite come up yet, and when I say that the sun hadn't come up yet, I mean in almost a month and a half. But polar nights are really intense. In any case, this particular well site that we were traveling to was about 60 miles west of Alpine, Alaska. It was deep in the wilderness, and our job took a week, but we finished and were headed back to camp to finish our hitch and go home. At the beginning and the end of the ice roads are guard shacks that you have to check in and out from for safety. No cell reception and radios work, only up to a distance, I think. If you don't check in or out in a set time, they come looking for you to ensure that you're not a popsicle. So, it was about 4 in the morning, not that that really matters in the land of endless night, and we were halfway across the ice road. Travel was slow as the speed limit on the roads is only 25 miles per hour. But that was when something appeared on the road in our headlights. It was a man, in jeans, sneakers, and a hoodie jacket, walking down an ice road in the wilderness tundra at 4 a.m., and it was minus 20 degrees outside. It's not completely unusual for the local Inuit people to be out this far hunting anyway, so maybe his snowmobile broke down and he's trying to get back to the guard shack? Seemed plausible, at least to me. He didn't acknowledge us though as our trucks rolled up next to him. He just kept shuffling forward. He didn't seem cold either. His clothing, while totally not appropriate for this extreme weather, appeared warm and dry. We also noticed that he wasn't Inuit but was Caucasian. I rolled down my window and asked if he needed any help and if he was okay. He still didn't acknowledge us though, just kept shuffling forward. His face was completely blank, devoid of any thought or emotions too. The other guys in my truck suggested that maybe he was in an accident and in shock. I continued rolling my truck alongside him as he trudged down the road, still trying to get his attention. Even in the extreme cold, I could occasionally get whiffs of a peculiar smell coming from him though. He smelt, I don't know, acidic almost, if that makes sense. There was just a lot about this guy that made the hair on my neck stand up. The guy behind me in the truck's crew cab had had enough of all this. He rolled down his window and reached out to grab the guy. He later said that he was just going to try and shake him out of his stupor, but before my buddy's hand could reach him, this walking popsicle spun around and latched onto my buddy's outstretched arm. He glared at my buddy and then at me with this look of pure rage, not removing his hand from his arm. If emotions had a physical temperature, then this guy could have melted the entire tundra that night. My buddy, he groaned in pain as he tried to get his arm free from Mr. Popsicle. And at that moment, this guy starts screaming in our faces. There was so much hate and rage and anger in that scream, I'll never forget it. It was absolutely terrifying. I slammed on the gas and spun out on the ice for a second before the wheels caught and launched us forward. Popsicle Dude had a hold of my buddy's arm and was trying to pull him out of the truck. He was running alongside the truck while the other guys in the cab held onto my buddy to keep him inside. After several moments, my buddy tore free from this guy and we hauled butt to the guard shack, another 30 miles down the road. We checked in with the guards and reported what we had just seen. The guard was looking at us like we were pulling a prank, but policy said that they had to check it out regardless. My buddy's arm was sore, and when he pulled back his sleeve, there were noticeable bruises in the shape of a hand around his arm. We filed a report with the guard, and we were told to head back to our camp. None of us really wanted to talk about what happened, and it was a pretty quiet drive the rest of the way. And we flew home the next day. Now, the next time we saw the guard at this shack, we asked him if they ever saw Mr. Popsicle on his patrols. He told us that they searched up and down that ice road for a solid 12-hour shift and they never saw anything, not even tracks in the snow leading off the road. He told us that it was a good prank and that he'd get us back for making him waste a shift driving around like that. But it wasn't a prank. I mean, who could make up a story like that? And who would willingly bruise their arm for a dumb prank like that? We never got a satisfying answer as to what happened that evening. I still wonder about that dude too, if he even was a dude. The Alaskan tundra is a weird place, and that was just one of my many weird stories from my time up there. I'll try and jot down some more of my experiences and share them with all of you guys. My family and I went on a trip to the Hocking Hills area of southern Ohio a few weeks ago. There was a place that I always wanted to visit, the abandoned ghost town Moonville Rail Tunnel. I had never been to this area, so I didn't know what to expect, but I did know that it was pretty deep in the woods. We took a trip from our rented cabin using Google for GPS to the location. We started driving, and it's, for a lack of a better term, real impoverished where we are driving. The hills have eyes-esque. We literally only see a few cars on the way there and are on the back roads. We get to a point where we need to enter into the forest, and we're close to the tunnel now. There was a sign that said that we were entering Bubblewood. For a little additional information, I drive a Mercedes that I'm just lucky to have and have my husband in the car. He's a black man with dreadlocks, my 10-year-old son who is nonverbal, autistic, and my 6-year-old daughter. So we drive down this really creepy stone road into the forest, and there's nothing back there. No houses, no cars, nobody. We see signs that we're close and pull into the parking lot. There's a footbridge there, and we walk over the footbridge and make our way toward the tunnel, which is a lot larger than I expected. And we hear this sound coming from the other side of the tunnel that goes into the woods away from the parking lot. A truck comes driving through the tunnel towards us while we're on foot. He gets out of his truck with a chainsaw, and it's a white guy in his 60s. He walks with my entire family everywhere that we go through the tunnel. I tried to make small talk with him and pull some info about if he worked for the Department of Natural Resources, etc., or something like that. But he really wasn't budging. We turn around to walk out of the tunnel, and he starts using a chainsaw behind us, and the sound is just echoing through the tunnel. I was already worried that my car was sending the wrong idea to the people, like we have money or something, but we really don't. We rush to the car to get the kids into their booster seats, and this guy comes driving over the footbridge in his truck towards us in the parking lot. To this day, I honestly don't even know how this truck could have fit on it. But he stops again and gets out of his truck and starts walking the other direction, much to our relief, to be honest. About this time, I noticed that there are dusty handprints on my car, though. I asked my husband if they were his, and we compared his hand and my son's, and they were definitely not a match. I don't know who could have touched the car, because where we were with the chainsaw man the entire time, I mean, we were the only ones in this spot as far as we knew. In any case, we got out of there as fast as we could after this. But just a few minutes later, I look into my rearview mirror. There's a bunch of dust kicked up behind us, and there he is. He had to have driven pretty fast on the stone road to catch us like that. There's nowhere to go in these woods, mind you. The road is basically one lane, and we have no cell phone service or GPS. And every time that I think we lose him, there he is again. At this point, I'm just waiting for my tires to get popped or something, or for this guy to ram me off the road into a ravine in the woods. But finally, we get out of the woods, and I turn out, and he's still following. We were following printed directions to get back, and I ended up making a wrong turn in the excitement, I think. The guy in the truck was finally gone, and I turned around to go back past the stone road that goes into the forest. There is one lone house near this road as well, and when I went there, there was his truck, parked there. He had to have seen us drive onto this road into the woods and taken some back way to the tunnel or something. I don't know if he was just trying to protect the site from more graffiti or what, but he really creeped us out. It was like a very scary movie trope rolled into one single event, and I'm glad that we all got out okay. When I was young, we used to live in a house that had a big sloping backyard that backed down into a big oval. Our fence line was along one end. The other was a big forest that went on for miles, and on the opposite side was a fence line and all the housing estate. Right smack bang in the middle of this field was play equipment. There were 0 people around here as it was quite isolated, and not many people frequented this oval. But me and my sister, we used to run down our sloping backyard, jump the fence, and run across to the play equipment almost every day. One day, though, we went out and we were playing as usual, having loads of fun. I remember climbing to the top of the equipment and sitting there with my sister. As we looked forward, though, we were facing the forest side, probably maybe 100 or 200 meters away. There was a row of bushes along the front of the entrance to the forest. When out of nowhere, something caught my eye. It looked like a black object bobbed up and down quickly. I told my sister, and we started watching that area, waiting. Then, clear as day, we saw 2 people poke their heads up completely dressed in black, head to toe, with what I recognize today as possibly balaclavas or hoodies. My sister and I sat there frozen. This went on for several minutes as they watched us. We made the decision to bolt as fast as we could towards our left, which was our fence line. I ran as fast as I think I ever run straight to the fence, jumped it, and ran straight up the backyard and into our house. To this day, me and my sister always mention the people in black, and I get shivers. Maybe it was some people playing a prank, but I doubt it. It just seemed like such an isolated area, and no one would have seen us if a struggle had broken out, but the distance between the forest line would have given us a good chance to run had they attempted anything. We used to go down there every day, so it creeps us out to think about how long they may have been planning this if it wasn't just some elaborate prank. So back in 2017, my girlfriend and I were in a sort of semi-long distance relationship. I lived in the Orlando area and she in Tampa. I would frequently travel via megabus to Tampa to see her and for concerts and stuff. But shortly after this experience, I switched exclusively to Amtrak and didn't regret having to pay 1 cent more. On this day, however, I had picked up Wendy's before the trip for dinner and had made my way to the boarding area. I noticed a sort of disheveled older man glaring at me openly. I didn't acknowledge him and instead boarded the bus. I sat near the back of the bus, placed my lone backpack on the seat next to me, and opened my food. As I was eating, I noticed that this same man who had been glaring had boarded and sat across the aisle from me, in the seat closest to the aisle, same as me. We had about, I would guess, 2 feet of separation at this point. And well, the bus takes off and we're soon on the interstate, headed west. Every time I look a bit at my food, he would sort of grumble though. Then he started raising his voice a bit and motioning to me. Then he started near shouting and pointing at my wrapper. I had headphones in and was comfortably ignoring him by this point. I'd worked a full shift at work that day, had headed home, showered, changed, grabbed my packed bag and headed out. So I was really tired and sort of hungry. But as I finished my food, balled up the wrappers and tossed them back into the bag, he just became nothing short of like irate, shrieking in Spanish, I think, and reached over to me, grabbing the bag and looking inside. When he saw that it was empty, he began screaming at me, and I bluntly told him to shut up. It was my food. At that, he went silent for a bit, until I saw him rummaging in his bag. He then slipped a hatchet out of his bag, laid it across his lap, and smirked at me. My blood ran cold. I'm a big guy, 6'3", 300, but in that small space and dealing with a weapon-wielding maniac, I knew that there was not much that I could do. I immediately stood up, walked to the driver, and told him what had happened. The next stop was Lakeland, and we were still about 45 minutes away, which was the only way that he could do something. I went back to my seat, grabbed my backpack, and fled to the upper level, sitting close to the window at the far back. Eventually, when we got to Lakeland, I saw him get approached and escorted off the bus. As he stepped off, he stumbled and fell, which is when I realized that he was also completely drunk or on something. I'm really glad that he didn't get the opportunity to hurt anyone on that bus, and I can only hope that he was detained after or separated from his weapon. But for as long as I live, I will never forget that smirk. In my younger days, just after high school, I was what you would probably consider a vagrant. No home to speak of, but not quite homeless either, I guess. Growing up poor in a poor dying factory town assures, well, few things. But most of the kids in my town knew and understood clearly that the only way to escape such a bleak place was to, well, leave, find work somewhere else, and don't come back unless you want to be trapped forever. And I was no exception to this understanding. It was the result of this desperate retreat from certain poverty that led me to work as a labourer in the pipeline industry. Grueling work, but decent pay. A fair start for one such as myself. After about 3 months of working, my foreman, who we'll call Jay, discovered that I was staying at a motel and wouldn't have it. He was kind enough to invite me to stay with his family until I found an apartment, and I was grateful for his offer. Jay and his family were honest rural people who lived in an honest rural area as well. A house with a barn in the field surrounded by the wooded hills, no neighbours, and one road in and out. Very similar to houses I had seen and been around growing up, to be honest. It was a great area and great company too, and I was thankful for such a turn in my luck. The first evening I stayed there, Jay's wife got me situated in my room, and I became acquainted with everyone in the house over dinner. After our meal, I stepped out for a cigarette and decided the tree line behind their barn would be the best area to smoke privately and inoffensively. The sun had set and then some by the time that I stepped out of the house. The moon was high and full, keeping the valley that I was in dully illuminated and casting the surrounding hills as dark shadows against the star-filled sky. It was a night that I think most would find peaceful. But as soon as my boots met the grass, that primal instinctive warning that a man gets sometimes began to slowly creep into my core. That alarm that tells you that something just ain't right here. Being young and dumb and brave, of course, I shrugged it off though, and continued to the tree line, attempting to keep the growing feeling at bay. When I at last approached the shadowed tangle of trees and underbrush on the outskirts of their yard, I reached into my pocket, pulled out my pack of Marlboros and my matches, and struck out a light. As I brought the match to my cigarette, though, that was when I saw it. Mere feet away from where I was standing, just barely within the trees, was the stark and outstanding silhouette of something huge. It stood crouched and still had to be at least 7 feet tall, large pointed ears and narrowly elongated snout. Its eyes glimmered that weird sort of infrared color you see when animals reflect light in their eyes at night. My initial panic-stricken thoughts were, that is a wolf. It was in the midst of this processing that I realized too that there was no way that this actually was a wolf, because wolves, they don't stand upright, and this creature was unmistakably on 2 legs. It was slouched low, one arm hung down past its haunches, and the other was pressed firmly against a tree to the right of it. Broad shoulders and a savage posture. It didn't move. It didn't seem startled or threatened or even afraid, but simply aware. It knew that I saw it, and it knew that I knew. I wish I could say that I did something, anything. I wish I could say that I ran or that I screamed or even moved, but I was just completely frozen in fear, standing rigid as a statue with nothing but a quickly dying matchlight between me and whatever monstrous thing was in front of me. We seemed to lock eyes for what felt like hours, but was really probably only moments, and as though the creature had decided it was done terrifying me, it straightened up, backed away slowly into the darkness of the trees. No sound, not a broken twig or even a rustled leaf was heard. As soon as my legs allowed me, I ran like heck back to the safety of Jay's house, slammed the door behind me, and was met with a look of concern from my foreman and his wife, who were watching TV in the living room. I immediately said, "Guys, there's something out there." It was the only thing that I could gasp. Jay exchanged a glance with his wife and looked back towards me. "Listen, boy, if you're going to stay here, you need to understand that there's things out in them woods that you best not pay attention to, all right?" He said it so nonchalantly, like he was talking about last night's football game. You hear a strange noise, you ignore it. You see a strange shadow, just ignore it. And if you get a strange feeling, just come inside and forget you felt it. That there are things out there we just don't understand, but we respect it, because it's their land. We just live here. It's been 15 years since my encounter with that creature in the woods, and I still think about it often. And though I stayed with Jay and his family for another 3 weeks after that night, I never felt easy on that property. That feeling never left, that warning stayed alert, and I will never go out to those woods at night unless I have absolutely no other choice. Once you know what's out there, you never see things the same again. And I know that this might seem far-fetched. I know that many won't believe what I'm saying, but this is a story that I had to share. So, this is the first time I was living alone in my apartment. I was walking out to my car to attend an evening church service when I hear this guy saying, "Hey, hello, can you help me?" I'm standing about maybe 10 feet away, and when I stop to observe, it's a man in a wheelchair. He has one sack of groceries in his lap and 2 on the ground beside him. He had on what looked like a veteran attire, I think, and combat boots. But what stood out to me the most is I noticed how incredibly built or buff he was. Not just his arms, too, but his calves. And at that, the hairs on my arms and neck instantly stood up. I guess while silently observing him, he was waiting for me to walk up to him. I sort of took a few steps back and shook my head. His immediate response was, "I'm not going to do anything to you. Can't you see I'm in a wheelchair?" He then pointed to his door and said, "Look, I just need help putting the bags inside my door on the floor, that's all." I declined politely and began to walk away. The screaming, cursing, and insults were what made me basically run to my car in the end. Safe in my car with the doors locked, I couldn't shake that awful feeling off of me, though. Fast forward to a couple of days later, as I'm driving down the street headed home, who do I see walking without a limp, cane, or with any visible disability? Yep, it was him. My heart instantly dropped. I stayed in my apartment for a week after that and had a male friend walk me to my car when I got off work because I was too scared to be by myself in case of any more encounters, I guess. To this day, this strange encounter, it still haunts me. So I went through the 22 weeks infantry OSUT, and the worst experience that I had was the individual night land nav. I was in the middle of the swamp around 2 a.m, looking at my map, when suddenly every hair on my body stood on end, and my red light flickers. I turn it off and start looking around when I spot the silhouette of a woman in what I can only describe as a pioneer's outfit. I looked away for a second and looked back, and nothing. I told myself that I must have been seeing things, picked a direction I thought was good, and started walking. I start hearing the crunching and breaking of leaves in rhythm with my steps behind me, though, as if someone was watching my pace, and my hair stood up again. I stopped, looked behind me, but nothing. I continued walking. Same thing happened. Looked again and nothing. I decided that 3 points were plenty for tonight and started booking it. As I'm running, I clearly hear and see something jumping from tree to tree above me, keeping pace as I cut through the woods, sprinting full speed. I'm not the fastest by any means, but at the same time, I had a 13:45 and have 5 seconds, 40 yards. Nothing could have moved that quickly through those trees like that. I make it to the starting point, turn in my stuff, and I sit on my gear. Another guy comes running in about maybe 15 minutes later. We still have 2 hours left at this point, so it makes no sense why he would be in a hurry. He does his stuff and sits next to me. He turns to me and says, "Dude, did you have point in the swamp?" I gesture at my boots and pants and, "Yeah, can't you tell?" "Oh, yeah, sorry, but, anyway, did you see a woman in a pioneer outfit?" "Yeah. I was writing down my points info when my light started flickering, and I heard something in the tree above me. I looked up and saw her sitting in a tree above the point, just sort of staring down at me with really lifeless eyes and an empty face. I ran, and I didn't stop till I got here." It's at this point where the guy sitting behind us leans forward. "You all saw her too?" We nod. "I started walking into the swamp when I saw her sit up out of the water and slowly turn to look at me. I froze and I only broke out of it when the lieutenant walked up behind me and asked what I was looking at. I looked at him and pointed, but when I did, she was gone. No noise, nothing." Now, this kid was an honest dude, and I could tell by the look in his eyes that he wasn't messing with us. I want to know, though, if anyone else has had an experience with something like this. It's something that I'm pondering a lot lately, and I don't know, I just can't get it off my mind. So last night, I was watching a video, and it brought up a memory that my brain must have blocked out for years, and now I'm sort of haunted by it again. You see, I was 13 years old, hanging out with my best friend. We lived in a small town in Wisconsin, and it was the 90s, so there wasn't much to do. No smartphones at that time. So we would always walk around town and play in the woods. On this day, we decided to walk to the railroad tracks. We chat about boys and have a bunch of giggles while getting to the wooded area of the tracks that go on until the next town, like miles away. And it must have been about maybe halfway into our journey, I hear a baby crying. I look at my friend as we continue our stride, thinking that she would have had some sort of facial expression acknowledging it, but no. I kept on walking for another minute, just silently asking myself why there's a baby crying. Finally, I just sort of stop and look at my friend and say, "Why is there a baby crying? We're out in the woods. Where's it coming from?" My friend looks at me with a confused face, and to my dismay, she says, "What are you talking about? I didn't hear anything." She laughs at me, and we continue our stride. Mind you, I still hear this constant wailing of a baby. As we're walking, I have like 10 billion questions going on in my head, and become increasingly agitated as this crying wouldn't stop until it became a sheer, almost painful, loud screaming. And it was at that point again where I stopped dead in my tracks, pulled my friend's arm, and I just burst into tears. "You have to hear that. Where is it? Where is its mum? It sounds like it could be hurt." My friend treated me like I was a lunatic and continued to make a point that she hasn't heard anything. While we're arguing, the crying stops. A sigh of relief, I sort of shift my head down in disbelief of it all. Looking at my feet, I then noticed that I was standing on something in the gravel of the middle of the tracks. I said, "What's that?" Pulled on the scrap that was visible to reveal something that gave me instant chills down my spine. It was a baby's onesie, tattered up and sort of ruined. I immediately felt sick to my stomach. My friend's eyes got wide, and I said, "Let's get out of here." And we never went back. I don't know what I experienced that day or why it's been blocked from my memory for like 15 years, but it truly terrified me. Let me know what your opinion is about all of this, as I'm still at a loss to this day.